Back again talking about how to develop your own research idea or proposal. And we are focusing in this screencast on, we're starting in this screencast on the research problem. The research problem is the educational issue or problem within your broad topic areas. In other words, you start with your topic or your idea, and then you try to identify one or more research problems that you believe need to be solved in that topic area. Now, I said that you believe need to be solved. It's even more helpful if there is evidence, if there is some sort of push from a community or from an external source suggesting that this is a problem as well. And you can either be addressing that problem or maybe trying to show that it's not as much of a problem as other people think it is. I mean, you can have your own ideas about how you're approaching that. But generally, there's an issue or a problem that you're addressing. In quantitative research, research problems tend to emphasize the need to explain, predict, or describe something. Whereas in qualitative research, research problems tend to focus on exploring a process or an event or a phenomenon. Now we move on to the next stage. Once you have a problem stated, then you can start talking about your research purpose. It follows from the problem. And it's your statement or your intent or objective for your research study. It's important to include this in your proposals, and certainly in your theses or your final reports or manuscripts, because it helps orient your reader to the study. In quantitative research, the purpose identifies the specific type of relationship being investigated using a specific set of variables. In qualitative research, the purpose focuses on exploring or understanding a phenomenon. Next, we have the research question. After you've completed your literature review and you've digested the literature, you will need to make an exact statement of the specific research questions you want to pursue. This helps ensure that you have a good grasp of what you want to do. It enables you to communicate your idea to others, and it helps guide the research process. For example, what variables will be examined or what methods will be needed. And a good literature review will logically end with your specific research questions. You might ask a general research question at the beginning of your proposal, but at the end of your literature review, you want to get a little more specific. And if you're going quantitative, then you would bleed that or blend that into your hypothesis statements. Speaking of quantitative research, in quantitative research, a research question typically asks about a relationship that may exist between or among two or more variables. And it should identify the variables being investigated and specify the type of relationship. Is it a descriptive investigation? Is it a predictive one? Are you trying to do something that's more causal, even though we've talked about how we can never really identify or prove, I'm using air quotes, causal relationships using any of our social science research methods. For example, we might ask, what effect does playing football have on a student's overall grade point average during the football season? That would be an example of a quantitative research question. Now, for qualitative, it's going to ask about the specific process or issue or phenomenon, and you can find scripts for writing various quantitative research questions online. Like literally, if you Google it, I think you can find some scripts for the questions. But instead of asking about relationships among variables, you're going to ask about a process, an issue, or a phenomenon. So, I mean, we sort of make these dichotomies here, and we've already talked about in other screencasts and in person, if you've been in my classes, that there is a bit of a false dichotomy that we set up between quantitative and qualitative. Because in the real world, we don't exist just in numbers or just in narratives. we exist more broadly. And so when we split these here, I mean, I'm saying that research questions or problems or whatever statements make specific points in quantitative or qualitative research, but the fact of the matter is you ask the research question that you want to ask. And ask the question. The methods will follow. So don't worry about whether you're quantitative or qualitative when you're asking the question. Concentrate on asking a question that really gets at answering the the problem or addressing the issue that you have stated earlier. So one way to do it is just to take your research problem and flip it around as a question. I've seen a lot of people do that very successfully. Your problem statement has to lend itself to that, but you can do that. And we should probably highlight that the essential characteristic of a researchable question is that there is some sort of data that can be collected in an attempt to answer the question. In other words, it's empirical. Sorry, my handwriting's horrible on the screen, but that says empirical. So, how do we make good research questions, clear research questions, usable research questions? Well, we want to make them feasible. We actually have to be capable of investigating those questions, trying to answer those questions, giving the available access, time, financial resources, etc. that we have available to us. They need to be clearly written and unambiguous. And what that usually means is you want to focus on one thing at a time. The biggest problem with research questions and the way that they are written is that a lot of people, myself included, have or do try to fit more than one issue or more than one problem into a research question. And you need to focus on one problem or issue per question. It needs to be significant or worthy of investigation. Right? It needs to be something that we need to know about. Because remember, ultimately you're trying to make a contribution. You're trying to look at something that hasn't necessarily been investigated, or at least hasn't been investigated adequately, or in your context, or in the way that you're suggesting before. And we often investigate relationships, meaning that there's a connection or an association between two or more characteristics or qualities. Now, I've spent some slides that we just went through talking about how these are often characteristics of quantitative research when you're talking about relationships, and it's more often going to be processes or problems when you're talking about qualitative. But really, those aren't hard and fast rules. Those are generalizations. Know that good research questions are going to ask, the why and the how questions. Those could be about relationships, those could be about processes, those could be about something else. But why and how are great ways to start. It's going to be important at some point now to define your terms for the reader. And defining your terms is important because often at this point we're using specific terminology or jargon that's related to our field of study or our area of investigation. So how do you define your terms? Well, one is you could look it up, right? What does the dictionary say? And you might want to look up what some of the synonyms are in order to see if there are other words that are likely to be used that would have similar meanings that would help you clarify that meaning. You might define them by using an example, or literally demonstrating the meaning, especially if it's a concept or a construct or a term that is a bit more abstract. For example, if you're trying to measure, we talked about this in other screencasts in class, if you're trying to measure intelligence, intelligence is in many ways an abstract construct. So literally defining it doesn't necessarily tell you what it is. Demonstrating how you might observe it, or what it might, an act or a situation or a behavior that demonstrates intelligence might be a way to get at how you're using the term. And that brings us to the operational definition. Give examples of how the term can be measured or identified. So if we're talking about, we just had one, I think back here, about creating a question, that was way back here, what effect does playing football have on students' overall grade point average during the football season? Well, maybe we need to give an example of what we're talking about when we say playing football. What does that mean? Is that if you just show up? Is that playing? Do you have to be, can you sit on the bench the whole game? And even though you're on the team and you're there and you're willing to play, but you're not really playing, does that count as playing football? Is it enough if you just go to practice? Is it enough if you are just listed on the team roster? I mean, there are lots of ways that we could go at that to be as specific and accurate as possible. So here are 3 examples of research questions that you might want to look at. So take a look at these questions and think about how you would rank them, 1 being highest out of the 3, for clarity or for significance, and why would you do that? And feel free to pause the video here and literally think about these questions for a second. So I'm assuming you've paused and you've taken a look at these and you've thought about clarity and significance. Let me just give you some impressions that I have. First of all, with this one, how many students in the grade 8 class signed up for a course in advanced mathematics this semester? Well, I mentioned before that I like how and why questions, but the problem with this one is that how many, which is a little trick using the English language that just is a count. It's a frequency, right? How many students in the grade 8 class signed up? Well, the question I want to know is, why do we care? Right? Why is this important or significant? It's pretty clear. I don't think we have a clarity issue. The answer could be something like 5. And then we're done. Your research study is over. There's no point to asking this question other than to get a very sort of a mundane administrative answer. So I would rank that low on significance but high on clarity. This next one. Why do so many students in the district say they dislike English? All right, well, it starts with a how or a why, and it really asks why. It's not just asking something else that we're using sort of the trick with English that how many asked in this earlier one. So why do so many students in the district say they dislike English? What is a little vague is so many students in the district. It would be great if there was a little more specificity there. Are we talking about more than half? Are we talking about 99%? Are we talking about all of them? Are we talking about, what are we talking about? What does so many mean? Is it 5? Is it 5 students say they dislike English in the whole district? Is that so many? So we have an ambiguous term here, and as a result, a little bit of an ambiguous question. I'm not really sure what the issue is. So clarity is, all right. It's not as good as it could be. Why do they say they dislike English? Well, this is getting at their perceptions and their rationales for a particular perspective or attitude about English. We don't know if this means English class or if this means just English in general, like do they dislike English movies? So again, we have a clarity issue. I think the significance for this, though, is relatively, it could be pretty high. Right? This could be a really interesting question with some tweaking, but it seems to be kind of falling victim to some clarity issues. And then this last question, is inquiry or lecture more effective in teaching social studies in predominantly poor schools? Now, it doesn't use how or why. Is that a problem? Well, what it does do is it sets up a relationship, a comparison between teaching style, inquiry or more lecture, and sort of teaching effectiveness. Now, one of the things that, if you've had me before, you'll know there are 2 words that I usually ask a lot of questions about. One is effective, and one is the word success. These are words that are used often in comparative and international education, rarely with any idea what they actually mean. So the first thing that I say is this doesn't mean much. Effective in teaching. What does that mean? Does that mean that everybody paid attention and was quiet? Does that mean that they all did their worksheets? Does that mean that somebody actually learned something? I don't know, because the person asking the question hasn't said. Does it just mean that the students scored highly? Well, that doesn't mean you're a good teacher or you taught well. And predominantly poor schools. How is poverty being measured? Is that below the poverty line? It could be. That would have to be defined. So you can see that each of these have some issues with clarity and significance. And you can see that how and why are sort of the way that we're orienting ourselves, but you don't have to use those exact terms in order to ask a significant question, because this one says is and then moves on, and I think it's got the potential for high significance.